They say the first year of widowhood is the hardest. They don't tell you that sometimes the hardest part is pretending to be sad. For 45 years, my life was a script written by my husband, and now that he's gone, my own son is trying to write the last tragic chapter for me. But he made one mistake. He underestimated his mother. This is the story of how I took back the pen and wrote my own ending. If you believe a woman's strength only grows with age, make sure you follow my story, like and share this video, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single step of how this quiet widow brought an empire of lies to its knees. My name is Elizabeth, and I am 72 years old. I didn't cry when they lowered my husband Richard's casket into the earth. The California sun was unforgiving that day, beating down on the manicured lawns of the Willow Creek Cemetery, a brilliant, sterile light that seemed to mock the whole somber affair. It felt just like the 45 years I had spent in his shadow, bright admired from the outside, but scorching and empty up close. My grief wasn't for the man in the polished mahogany box. It was for a ghost, a version of myself I'd given up on meeting decades ago, a woman who might have had her own thoughts, her own voice. I stood there a pillar of quiet dignity, as they say, my hand resting on a black silk dress. I hadn't chosen my expression, a carefully blank mask I had perfected over a lifetime of silent dinners and public appearances. Later at the wake, the performance continued. It was held in the cavernous living room of our Ocean View home, a house Richard had designed to impress, not to comfort. Its floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Pacific like a cold, indifferent painting. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the low hum of feigned sorrow. I watched my son Mark navigate the room. He had Richard's height and tailored suits, but none of his father's predatory charm. Mark was all anxious ambition, a man perpetually trying to fill shoes that were 2 sizes too big. He moved from one of Richard's business associates to another, his hand outstretched, his smile strained. His eyes, however, weren't filled with loss. They were calculating, scanning, assessing. He wasn't mourning a father, he was inheriting a network. Each handshake, each murmured, "Thank you for coming," was an audit of his new assets. Then there was Chloe, my daughter-in-law, a woman who seemed less born and more curated, sculpted by Instagram filters and a relentless, bloodless ambition. Her grief was a fashion statement. She wore a black dress that was just a little too form-fitting, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She flitted between clusters of guests, a butterfly of performative mourning. I watched her touch the arm of a local real estate mogul, her head tilted at the perfect angle of sympathy. She would murmur something, and he would nod his eyes, lingering on her a moment too long. She was building her own network right here, amidst the wreckage of my life. She eventually made her way to me, her stiletto heels clicking softly on the marble floor, a sound like a ticking clock. She placed a hand on my arm. It was cold. Her nails, a perfect glossy crimson, dug slightly into my sleeve. "Are you holding up, Liz?" she asked. The use of Liz always felt like a small assertion of power, a casual dismissal of the Elizabeth I clung to as the last remnant of my formal self. But her eyes weren't on me. They were already scanning the room over my shoulder, searching for her next target, someone more important, more useful. I saw them so clearly in that moment, not as my son and his wife, not as family who had come to comfort a grieving mother. I saw them for what they were, vultures, circling patient and silent, waiting for the last breath to leave the body so they could pick the bones clean. They weren't just circling Richard's memory. They were circling me and the life I had left the house, the money. What remained of my life wasn't a future to be lived. It was an estate to be settled. A man I vaguely recognized as one of Richard's accountants approached his face a jumble of soft, apologetic features. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice low and respectful. Richard was a titan, a pillar of this community. I simply nodded. Richard was a pillar, yes. A cold, unyielding column of stone that I had been chained to for nearly half a century. People saw the grandeur of the pillar, the way it held everything up. They never saw the woman tethered to its base, living in its perpetual shadow. Chloe reappeared at my elbow, a fresh glass of champagne in her hand. For herself, of course. Not for me. "Mr. Henderson, so good of you to come." She purred effortlessly, inserting herself into the conversation. "Mark and I were just saying how much we valued your guidance over the years. We hope that can continue." She gave him a smile that was both dazzling and predatory. The accountant flustered and flattered, stammered his assurances. Mark joined them, clapping the man on the shoulder. "Absolutely, Bill. We're going to need all the help we can get to navigate this." His gaze flickered towards me for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of calculation that I caught and filed away. They were already laying the groundwork, right here, in front of me, using the veneer of grief as their shield. The hum of the room felt like a vibration under my feet, the sound of an engine turning over. The engine of their ambition, fueled by my husband's death. I felt a profound sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. The woman in the black dress, the grieving widow, was a character I was playing, and I was suddenly desperately tired of the role. The last of the guests finally trickled out as the sun began to set, painting the sky in garish streaks of orange and purple. The house fell quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, oppressive silence of an empty stage after a bad play. Mark and Chloe lingered a parody of dutiful children. "We should get going. Mom?" Mark said, straightening his tie. "Let you get some rest." He didn't meet my eyes. Chloe was already checking her phone, her thumb swiping furiously across the screen, her face illuminated by its cold blue light. Probably checking the social media engagement on her post about Richard's tragic passing. "I'll have the caterer's bill sent to your office, Mark," I said, my voice flat. It was the first thing I'd said in an hour that wasn't a polite murmur. Mark flinched almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Mom. Don't you worry about a thing." Chloe looked up from her phone, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes, before it was replaced by a saccharine smile. "We'll take care of everything, Liz. You just focus on healing." The word sounded obscene coming from her lips. They left, and I stood by the window watching the taillights of Mark's car disappear down the long, winding driveway. The house was finally mine. The silence was absolute. And in it, I didn't feel loss. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. The battle hadn't ended with Richard's death. It had just begun. A week bled into the next. The sympathy cards stopped arriving, the condolence casseroles dried up, and the silence in the house became a physical presence. It was a weight, a thick blanket of nothing that smothered every sound. I moved through the empty rooms like a ghost, my own footsteps echoing on the polished hardwood floors. In all those years with Richard, the house had never been truly quiet. It had been filled with his booming voice, the demanding ring of his telephone, the sound of his heavy footsteps on the stairs. His absence was a vacuum, and my old habits rushed in to fill the void. I did what I had always done, what I was programmed to do after 45 years of service. I cooked. It was a Tuesday. I remember the light was a soft, greyish white, the kind that promises rain but never delivers. I went to the kitchen, my hands moving with an intelligence separate from my mind. I took a whole chicken from the refrigerator. I rinsed it, patted it dry, and rubbed it with salt, pepper, and herbs from the small garden I was allowed to keep. A roast chicken. It was Richard's favourite. The smell of it roasting had been the scent of our marriage, a comforting aroma that masked something slowly burning. It was a ritual of servitude, a muscle memory of placation I couldn't yet shake. I peeled potatoes, snapped the ends off green beans, and set the dining room table for three. 3 porcelain plates, 3 sets of silver, 3 crystal water goblets. It was absurd, a table set for ghosts and liars. But my body didn't know how to stop. This was my function: to provide, to serve, to wait. At precisely 6 o'clock, the time Mark and Chloe usually arrived for our obligatory weekly dinner, my phone buzzed on the granite countertop. The name Mark flashed on the screen. A knot of something cold and familiar tightened in my chest. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered. "Hello, Mark." My voice was even betraying nothing. "Hey, Mom." His voice was different, not sad, not tired. It was flat hollow, as if he were reading from a script. "Listen, something's come up. Chloe and I we're completely exhausted. The stress of it all, you know. It's finally catching up to us. We're just going to have a quiet one tonight, okay? No dinner." The words were perfectly reasonable, plausible even. Anyone would understand. But I had a PhD in Richard's lies, and I could recognize the cheap, clumsy forgery of his sons. Richard's lies were masterpieces of manipulation, intricate and believable. Mark's were lazy, store-bought imitations. Disappointment that familiar old friend settled into the chair across from me. It had been my constant companion for decades. "Oh," I said. "Of course, dear. I understand. You both need to rest." The lie slid easily from my own tongue. It was a language we all spoke fluently in this family. "Thanks for understanding, Mom," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. We'll call you tomorrow." He hung up before I could reply. The dial tone hummed in my ear for a long moment before I placed the phone back on the counter. The smell of rosemary and thyme filled the silent kitchen. I looked at the golden brown chicken resting on its platter, the potatoes glistening with butter, the vibrant green of the beans. A perfect meal for no one. My hands, moving on autopilot, began to put it all away. I wrapped the chicken in foil, scraped the potatoes into a container, and dumped the beans into the trash. Each movement was precise, mechanical, the actions of a machine being shut down for the night. I went to the kitchen window, the same one I'd stood at for countless years, and stared out at the twilight bleeding over the Pacific. The sky was a bruised purple, the ocean a sheet of dark steel. The lights in Mark and Chloe's house across the street were on their modern glass and stucco box, a stark contrast to the traditional architecture of my own. I watched, I don't know why. Maybe some part of me was waiting to see a light go off, a sign that they were, as he said, settling in for a quiet night. And then I saw it. The silent, insect-like gleam of headlights as their garage door slid open. Mark's Tesla. A sleek black Predator glided out of the darkness. It paused at the end of their driveway. I held my breath. It should turn right towards its own garage. A quiet night at home. Instead, it turned left. Its red taillights cut a sharp, decisive path away from me, away from our street, heading down the hill towards the town centre. A knot of pure ice formed in my stomach. It wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't stress. It was a lie. A bald, lazy, disrespectful lie. He hadn't even tried to make it a good one. He assumed I was the same old woman. The one who believed everything, who never questioned, who would just sadly put the food away and wait for the next phone call. He thought I was a fool. I stood there, hand pressed against the cold glass of the window long after the taillights had vanished. The lie didn't just hang in the air. It solidified. It became a wall between me and the sun I thought I knew. And for the first time, it wasn't disappointment I felt. It was a different emotion, something colder and sharper. It was rage, a quiet, patient rage that had been sleeping for 45 years, and it was finally beginning to wake up. The house was no longer just empty. It was a crime scene, and I was the only witness. I did something I hadn't done in 45 years. I acted on pure, undiluted impulse. The obedient wife, the doting mother, the quiet widow, all of those well-worn costumes fell away in an instant. A raw, jagged feeling took their place, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to experience since I was a girl. I grabbed my purse and the keys to my car, an old Buick that Richard had always called the boat. He'd bought it for me as a practical, unglamorous vehicle, a symbol of my domestic station. It was reliable, sturdy, and utterly devoid of passion. Tonight, it was my getaway car. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the garage. My hands trembled slightly as I put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a low, rumbling groan, a sound that felt like a protest from a long-dormant beast. I backed out of the driveway, my movements jerky and unfamiliar. I hadn't driven at night in years. Richard had always insisted on driving. "You're too nervous in the dark, Elizabeth," he'd say, taking the keys from my hand. It wasn't concern, it was control. He was right, I was nervous. But tonight, fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. It was fuel. I followed the ghost of Mark's taillights, keeping a safe distance, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The familiar streets of Willow Creek seemed alien, distorted by the darkness and my own churning emotions. The manicured lawns, the perfectly lit homes, they all looked like a movie, set a facade for the secrets they concealed. The Tesla was easy to follow. It moved with a smug, silent efficiency, a reflection of its owners. It led me away from the quiet residential lanes and into the heart of the town centre, a place I usually only saw in the daylight for grocery runs or trips to the pharmacy. It pulled into the valet lane of the Gilded Pelican, my breath caught in my throat. The Gilded Pelican was the most expensive, most exclusive restaurant in Willow Creek. It was a place for celebrations, for deals for men like Richard to flaunt their success. It was not a place for two people, exhausted by the stress of it all. I parked across the street, killing the engine and the headlights, plunging myself into the relative darkness of my own car. My old Buick felt like a dinosaur parked among the sleek, modern vehicles that lined the curb. I was an anachronism, a relic from another time, spying on the future. Through the large, clean plate glass window, under the warm, ostentatious glow of a crystal chandelier, I saw them. My son, Mark, my daughter-in-law, Chloe, and a third person, Arthur Vance, our family lawyer for over 30 years. A man who had held my hand at the funeral and told me, "Don't worry, Elizabeth Richard made sure you would be taken care of." There was no grief at their table. There was no exhaustion. There were bottles, multiple bottles, champagne glistening in an ice bucket. Their faces were animated, flushed with excitement. I watched my blood turning to ice as Chloe threw her head back, a silent peal of laughter animating her perfectly made-up face. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated triumph. Mark, my son, the boy I had raised his glass in a toast. His expression wasn't one of sadness or fatigue. It was relief, triumphant, boundless relief, as if a great weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. Arthur Vance, the trusted family friend, the sober legal advisor, grinned broadly and clapped Mark on the back, a gesture of conspiratorial camaraderie. They were celebrating. The image burned itself into my mind, a photograph developed in acid, searing and permanent. They were toasting my husband's death. They were toasting their freedom, and they were toasting whatever came next. The lie about dinner wasn't just a small white lie to spare my feelings. It was a cover story. This was the real event of the night. This was the business meeting. This was the victory party. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. The strained condolences at the wake, Mark's calculated networking, Chloe's hungry ambition, Arthur's presence here at this table. He wasn't just a guest, he was a key player. This was a coup. In that single crystalline moment, sitting alone in the dark of my obsolete car, the meek woman who had dutifully cooked the roast chicken died. She evaporated a puff of smoke, leaving behind something hard and cold and sharp. I was not a grieving widow to be pitied and managed. I was not a tired old woman to be placated with gentle lies. I was a target. I was the last obstacle standing between them and whatever they wanted. And looking at their smiling, laughing faces, I knew they had a plan to remove me. The hunt had just begun. But they had made a critical error. They assumed the prey was unarmed. They had no idea that 45 years in the shadows had taught me how to see in the dark. I started the engine of the Buick, its low rumble no longer a protest, but a growl. I pulled away from the curb and drove home, not in a haze of grief, but in a state of chilling absolute focus. The war was on, and I was going to win. The morning light was thin, the kind of pale, watery light that makes everything look older and more tired. I was staring at a water ring on the mahogany side table, a permanent ghost of Richard's nightly glass of scotch, when the doorbell chimed. It was too early for a social call. I knew with a certainty that settled like ice in my stomach who it would be. Arthur Vance stood on my porch, his face arranged into a mask of solemn concern. He clutched a briefcase like a shield. His suit was perfectly pressed, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad for trustworthy financial advisors, but his eyes, they didn't match the rest of him. They were quick assessing like a bird's. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice a low, rehearsed murmur. "I am so sorry to be intruding at a time like this. I didn't invite him in. I just stood there, my hand on the doorknob, the wood cool against my palm." "What is it, Arthur?" He held up a thick, cream-coloured envelope. It wasn't a sympathy card. It was too heavy, too official. "There are some formalities, matters pertaining to Richard's estate. It's best we address them sooner rather than later for your own security." "For my security?" The words hung in the air, a blatant, insulting lie. I took the envelope. The paper was stiff, expensive. It felt like a weapon. I didn't open it. Not in front of him. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until even he, a man paid to be professionally smooth, had to shift his weight. "It's all in there," he said, gesturing at the envelope. "Fairly standard procedure. Mark asked me to deliver it personally, to walk you through it if need be. He's very worried about you, Elizabeth. Overwhelmed, Mark." Of course, my son the worrier, the kestrel circling high above, waiting for the final shudder. "I'm sure he is," I said. The words were flat, devoid of the emotion he was clearly expecting. I wanted to see a flicker of something real in his eyes, a crack in the facade, but there was nothing. Just polished, professional emptiness. "Call me if you have any questions," he said, turning to leave. "Anything at all." I closed the door before he was fully down the steps. The click of the lock sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, the envelope in my hand. It felt cold, venomous. I walked into the living room, the room where I had hosted decades of family Christmases, birthday parties. The room where I had sat night after night, while Richard read his paper, the silence between us, a living thing. Now the silence felt different. It was waiting. I sat in my armchair, the one with the worn floral pattern, and slit the envelope open with a trembling finger. The document slid out. It wasn't a letter. It was a formal petition to the court. Page after page of dense, impenetrable legalese, a forest of words designed to get you lost. But I didn't need to understand every heretofore and whereas. I found the parts that mattered, the parts that were written in blood, as far as I was concerned. A clause. In Richard's revised will. A will I had never seen, never heard of. Signed and dated 3 months ago. I pictured him in his final weeks, his mind a fog of medication, his hands shaking. Had Mark guided his pen? Had Chloe stood over his shoulder, smiling that predatory smile? The clause was a masterpiece of cruelty. It granted Mark full and immediate power of attorney over my affairs contingent on the signed opinion of 2 physicians declaring me, the words burned on the page, mentally unfit to manage my affairs. There were letters attached, 2 of them. One from a Dr. Alistair Finch, a man I'd never met. The other from Dr. Peterson, our family doctor for 20 years. He had been to the house just last month, patted my hand, told me I was strong as an ox. His letter was full of clinical detached observations, signs of memory lapse, emotional distress, difficulty with complex financial concepts, lies, all of it. A script written by my son. And then, the reason, the grand finale, the house, my home. The place where I'd raised my child, tended my garden, lived my entire adult life for 45 years. It had to be sold. Immediately. To settle it claimed urgent and outstanding debts. Not my debts. Not Richard's. Debts incurred by Mark's latest can't-miss real estate venture. A development of luxury condos that had predictably turned into a money pit. They were going to sell my home out from under me to pay for his failure. And me. The final paragraph laid it out with chilling clarity. A recommendation for my long-term care and safety. They had already researched facilities. The brochure for Sunny Meadows Assisted Living was tucked neatly at the back of the stack. It showed smiling, white-haired seniors playing bingo. I let the papers fall into my lap. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it stole my breath. This wasn't just about money. It was an erasure. They were trying to declare me a non-person, a confused, senile old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life, to lock me away in a room that smelled of antiseptic and despair while they picked over the bones of my life. This was the cage they had built for me, not with iron bars, but with paper and ink, with the casual cruelty of a pen stroke. The woman who had wept for a lost life at her husband's funeral was gone. In her place, something hard and cold was beginning to form. They thought they were dealing with a frail old widow. They had no idea who I was about to become. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The legal papers sat on the coffee table, a monument to my family's betrayal. I felt hollowed out, a shell scoured clean by a toxic tide. That's when Olivia arrived. She let herself in with the key I'd given her, her footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. Grandma, she found me in the living room, still sitting in my armchair, staring at nothing. She's 17 with my late husband's dark hair, but with an intelligence in her eyes that is all her own. She sees things. Always has. She didn't rush over and ask what was wrong. She just came and sat on the ottoman, her presence a quiet, solid thing in the echoing silence of the house. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling, the soft glow illuminating her face. The normal, mundane act was a strange comfort. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I was numbly sorting through a box of Richard's old papers from his desk, mostly tax documents and old receipts, a pointless mechanical task to keep my hands from shaking. You know, she said, her eyes still on her phone. Grandpa was always weird about his study, like super private. I stopped shuffling papers. I looked at her. What do you mean weird? I don't know. Just locked. All the time. Remember that time I tried to go in there to find a stapler for my homework? I was like 10. He almost had a heart attack, said it was his sanctuary and no one was allowed in. Not even you, right? She was right. In 45 years, I had probably been in that room less than a dozen times, and always with him present. It was his space, his domain. I had respected that. Or maybe I had just been conditioned to. It was one of 1,000 small territories I had ceded over the years, without a fight. Olivia held up her phone, showing me a screen. It was an old pixelated photo on a Facebook page. A group of men in tuxedos, Richard among them younger, his hair still dark, were raising champagne flutes. They all had the same look of smug, untouchable power. He was in this thing, she said, a note of teenage disdain in her voice. The Willow Creek Gentlemen's Society. Their old posts are so cringe. All these pictures of them at charity balls pretending to be philanthropists. A gentleman's society. I'd heard him mention it over the years. A club for the town's most influential men, business leaders, doctors, lawyers. Arthur Vance was in that picture too, standing right next to Richard, his arms slung around my husband's shoulder. They looked like kings of a small, self-made kingdom. Her words, so casual, so innocent, weren't just words. They were a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. Richard's study, his sanctuary, the one place that was entirely his. The legal papers on the table weren't just a threat, they were a consequence. But a consequence of what my quiet, predictable husband, the man who read the Financial Times every morning and fell asleep in his armchair every night. Who was he? A new feeling began to push through the numbness. Not hope, exactly. More like purpose. A cold, clear sense of direction. I had been looking at my life with Mark and Chloe at the future they were trying to steal from me. But Olivia had just turned my head, forcing me to look backward. Into the past. Into the heart of this house. I stood up. My joints ached, but for the first time all day, I felt a surge of strength. I had to get into that room. I felt like a trespasser in my own home, a grave robber about to disturb a sacred tomb. But desperation was a powerful motivator. I was no longer just sorting through papers looking for financial clues. I was searching for the man I had married. I was searching for an answer to a question that was beginning to terrify me. What secrets was he protecting in that room? And were they the reason my own son was now trying to destroy me? I walked to the study door. It was, as always, locked. I went to the kitchen junk drawer, my hands rummaging past old batteries and rubber bands until they closed around a thin metal nail file. My heart was pounding a frantic drum against my ribs. I wasn't a fragile old woman anymore. I was a burglar. And I was breaking into my husband's life. The lock was old, simple. It clicked open after a few seconds of nervous jiggling. The air that rushed out to meet me was stale, heavy, with the scent of old paper leather and something else. A faint, cloying smell, like dried cigar smoke. The room was exactly as I remembered it from my rare visits. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. He never read a massive oak desk dominating the space. It was a cliché of masculine power. A stage set. I started searching. Not for a will, not for bank statements. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I would recognize it when I saw it. I pulled open drawers. They were meticulously organized. Pens in one tray, stationery in another. Financial records, business contracts, all filed away with an obsessive precision that was so typical of Richard. It was the public face of a successful man. Nothing was out of place. It was all too perfect. My frustration grew. Was this it? Was Olivia wrong? Was it just a room where a man liked his privacy? I was about to give up, to retreat back into my despair, when my fingers brushed against a roll of paper tucked away at the very back of a deep filing cabinet drawer, hidden beneath a stack of old tax returns from the 1980s. I pulled it out. It was heavy brittle with age, held together with a dried-out rubber band that snapped the moment I touched it. I unrolled it on the floor. The paper was thick, almost like parchment. It was the original blueprints for the house dated 1970. I'm no architect, but I've lived in this house for nearly half a century. I know its bones. I know every creak in the floorboards, every draft from every window. And I knew the moment I saw it that something was wrong. Olivia, hearing the silence, had wandered in. She knelt on the floor beside me, her young face curious. "What's that old pirate map?" My hand was shaking as I pointed to the section labeled basement. "It's the house," I whispered. "But it's wrong." I traced the lines with my finger. "The wine cellar. See here. In the plans, it's smaller. There's a thick wall, and the dimensions are off. My cellar is bigger than this. It goes all the way to the foundation wall." Olivia leaned in closer, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked from the blueprint to the wall, then back again. Then she pulled out her phone. My first thought was that she was bored, retreating back into her digital world. But she wasn't scrolling through Instagram. She opened an app, the screen showing a strange, pulsing grid of light. "It's this LiDAR scanner app I had to use for a geography project," she explained, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "It uses the phone's camera to measure distances and map a room. It can see through stuff. Sort of." She stood up and walked to the basement door. I followed her down the wooden stairs, my heart a slow, heavy drum. The air in the cellar was cool and damp-smelling of earth and aging wine. The massive oak wine rack, a gift from Richard on our 10th anniversary, stood against the far stone wall, filled with dusty bottles we never drank. Olivia held up her phone, pointing it at the wall behind the rack. The grid on the screen shimmered. She moved it slowly from left to right. Most of the wall showed up as a solid flat plane. But in the middle, directly behind the heaviest part of the wine rack, the screen glowed differently. A rectangular shape appeared. A void. A hollow space about 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide. "Whoa, Grandma," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Secret room." Her casual, almost excited tone was a jarring contrast to the wave of cold dread that was washing over me. A secret room. In my house. Hidden for 45 years. This wasn't a place for storing old treasures. This was a place for hiding something terrible. "We have to move it," I said, my voice hoarse. Together, we started pulling at the oak rack. It was immensely heavy, groaning in protest. We pulled with all our strength, our feet slipping on the cool concrete floor. Dust motes danced in the single bare bulb that lit the cellar. Slowly, inch by painful inch, the rack scraped away from the wall, revealing the cold, bare stone behind it. And there, almost invisible against the rough-hewn stone, was the faint, seamless outline of a door. A door with no handle, no hinges, no lock. It was designed to be forgotten, to not exist. My home wasn't a sanctuary. It was a tomb. And I had a sickening feeling that I was about to find out what or who was buried inside. We stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, staring at the stone outline. The silence of the cellar was absolute. My mind reeled, trying to process the impossibility of it. A hidden door. All this time. Beneath my feet. "How do we open it?" Olivia whispered, her earlier excitement replaced by a tangible sense of awe and fear. I ran my fingers along the seam. It was perfect, the work of a master craftsman. There was no purchase, no place to grip. I pushed against it. It was as solid as the foundation itself. Then I noticed it, a single, slightly discolored stone near the bottom, no bigger than my thumb. It looked different from the others, less weathered. Acting on pure instinct, I pressed it. There was no click, no sound at all, but I felt a faint vibration through the floor. A low, grinding noise, like stone on stone, echoed from within the wall. A vertical crack of absolute darkness appeared, as the door, impossibly heavy, swung inward on hidden, counterweighted hinges. The air that drifted out was ancient, stale, and colder than the rest of the cellar. It smelled of dust and confinement, and something else. Something metallic and vaguely organic, like old blood. It wasn't a wine cellar extension. It wasn't a panic room. It was a chamber, small no more than 8 feet by 8 feet. The walls were thick, padded with what looked like grey acoustic foam, the kind you see in a recording studio. It was soundproof. In the exact center of the room, a single high-backed leather chair was bolted directly to the concrete floor. The leather was cracked and stained, the armrests worn smooth. And the floor around it, the concrete was darker, covered in spidery, dark brown stains that no amount of cleaning could ever fully erase. The sight of it made my stomach clench. This was not a place for secrets. This was a place for screams. On a small, bare metal shelf, bolted to the far wall, sat a single object, a heavy, black metal safe. It wasn't large, but it looked impregnable. It had a classic combination dial numbered 0 to 99. No keyhole, no electronic pad, just the dial. My mind, which had been racing with 1,000 horrified questions, suddenly went still and cold. A memory buried for decades surfaced with perfect, chilling clarity. Our 25th wedding anniversary. We were at a fancy restaurant, Richard flushed with wine and self-satisfaction. He'd given me a diamond necklace. I remember feeling a little drunk, a little disconnected as he leaned in close. You know, my darling, he'd slurred his breath, smelling of expensive brandy, the date of this day, our special day. It's more than just a date. It's the key to my security, to my entire legacy. At the time, I'd dismissed it as drunken sentimentality, a clumsy romantic metaphor. Now, standing at the threshold of this cold, dead room, the words came back not as romance, but as a prophecy. My legacy. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grasp the dial. Olivia stood behind me, a silent, terrified sentinel. I took a deep breath, the foul air of the room filling my lungs. Our 25th anniversary. August 19th, 1980. I turned the dial. Right past the first number twice and then to it. 8. Left past the next number once and then to it. 19. Right again directly to the last. 80. For the year. But the number on the dial only went up to 99. 1980. Of course, just the numbers. I spun the dial one last time right to 0. For a second, nothing happened. Then a heavy metallic clunk echoed in the small space, loud as a gunshot. The safe wasn't locked anymore. I pulled the heavy door open. It swung outward with a low groan. I peered inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. I don't know what I expected. Cash. Gold bars. Deeds to secret properties. Something to explain the wealth, the secrecy. But there was nothing like that. No money, no jewels. There was only one item inside. A thick, red, leather-bound book. A ledger. It was heavy in my hands, the leather smooth and cool to the touch. It felt important. Sacred, almost. With trembling fingers, I opened it to the first page. The paper was thick, creamy, filled with my husband's familiar, precise architectural handwriting. But these weren't notes about business deals or stock portfolios. The first entry was dated, a name a prominent judge in our town. And then a series of notes, details, not of a business transaction, but of an encounter with a young woman her age listed clinically beside her name. A description of what was done to her in this room on that bolted-down chair. What she was forced to do. It was written with the detached, meticulous detail of a lab report. I flipped the page, and another, and another. Page after page, year after year, it was all there. A meticulous, horrifying record of the Willow Creek Gentlemen's Society. It wasn't a social club. It was a hunting party. Richard wasn't just a member. He was the architect, the ringleader. He procured vulnerable young women, runaways girls, in-debt students desperate for money for the town's most powerful men. And he filmed it. For leverage. For blackmail. The last line on each entry was always the same. Footage secured, subject compliant. The names in the book were a roll call of the city's elite. Politicians, CEOs, doctors. The men who ran this town, their public lives, built on a foundation of secret, monstrous cruelty. And my husband Richard, the man I had shared a bed with for 45 years, the man who I thought was just a quiet, emotionally distant businessman. He was the gatekeeper, the recorder of their sins. He wasn't a businessman. He was a monster. The ledger in my hands wasn't his legacy. It was his confession. And in that cold, silent, terrible room, I finally understood. The legal notice, Mark's betrayal, the threat to my home, it all started here, in the dark, rotten heart of my husband's secret life. The house wasn't just built on a concrete foundation. It was built on the suffering of countless women. And now the walls were finally starting to talk. The world didn't just tilt on its axis. It fractured. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was heavy, filled with the ghosts of unspoken words and the echoes of monstrous acts. I sat in Richard's leather chair, the red ledger lying open on the desk in front of me, its pages a testament to a 45-year lie. The laughter I had seen through the restaurant window, the clinking of champagne glasses played over and over in my mind, but the sound was different now. It wasn't the sound of grief-stricken children finding a moment of relief. It was the triumphant cackle of predators who had successfully cornered their prey, Chloe. It was always Chloe. Her ambition was a tangible thing, a sharp, metallic scent in any room she entered. I had seen her eyes rake over this house, not with admiration, but with the cold calculation of an appraiser. I had mistaken it for the simple, avaricious hunger of the young. I had been a fool. She hadn't been celebrating the future sale of a house. She had found this book, Richard's true legacy. My mind, which had felt so sharp and clear in the cellar, was now a fog of horror. I tried to piece it together, the timeline of deceit. When did she find it? After the funeral, surely. Poking around, feigning helpfulness, while I was lost in the days of organizing a memorial for a man I was realizing I had never known. She must have come into this study, this forbidden sanctuary of his, and searched. And she had found the key to unlocking everything she ever wanted. But the plan, the cruelty of it was breathtaking. She didn't just use it to get the house. She had used it to break my son. She was blackmailing her own husband. The thought was so vile, it made me physically nauseous. I imagined the scene. Chloe, holding this ledger, her eyes gleaming. Mark, my Mark, the little boy who used to fall asleep with his head in my lap, being presented with an impossible choice. His career, his reputation, his entire future, or his mother. And he had chosen himself. He had chosen her. A wave of something that felt like pity washed over me, cold and useless. He was a victim too, in a way. A weak man trapped by a ruthless woman and the shadow of a monstrous father. But the pity receded as quickly as it came replaced by a glacial anger. Weakness is a choice. He had stood by her, smiled with her, held her hand as they toasted their victory over me. He was complicit. He was a vulture, just as I had first thought, only he was picking at a corpse that was still breathing. I held the power now. This book. It was a bomb. I could press the button. I could send a few anonymous emails, make a few copies. I could detonate this bomb in the heart of Willow Creek and watch the fallout obliterate reputations, destroy families, end careers. The chief of police, a sitting judge, Julian Harrison, the tech billionaire, who was practically a local deity. Their names were all here, their sins meticulously recorded in Richard's spidery handwriting. But what would that make me? The woman who exposed them all, or just the widow of the monster who orchestrated it? My entire life, my identity as Elizabeth Sterling, wife of Richard, a respected businessman, would be rewritten. It was all a lie. The charity dinners, the polite smiles at the country club, the quiet pride I felt in his success. All of it was built on a foundation of human suffering, on the abuse of young women whose names weren't even recorded in this ledger, only referred to by numbers. The weight of that choice was a physical pressure in my chest. To speak or to remain silent, to unleash a hurricane, or to allow myself to be quietly swept away into the forgotten corner of a nursing home. Is it better to be the wife of a devil remembered in infamy, or a homeless, anonymous old woman erased from your own life? I stood up and walked through the silent house. My hand trailed along the floral wallpaper in the hallway. Richard had picked it out. He'd said it reminded him of my grace. The words turned to ash in my memory. I looked at the photos on the mantelpiece. Mark's graduation, Olivia's first birthday, our silver anniversary. Richard's arm around me, both of us smiling for the camera. A perfectly curated fiction. I felt a desperate urge to smash them all, to shatter the glass and tear the smiling faces to pieces. But I didn't. My anger was colder than that now. It was a tool, not a tempest. I stopped in front of the portrait of me Richard had commissioned for my 50th birthday. The artist had captured a woman I barely recognized. Serene, content, a gentle smile playing on her lips. A woman whose world was small and safe. A woman who believed in her husband. That woman was a ghost. She had died with Richard, and I was only now realizing I was at her funeral too. I went back to the study. I picked up the ledger. It felt heavier now, its pages saturated with the lives it had ruined and the lives it still could. The choice wasn't about my past anymore. My past was a ruin, and there was no rebuilding it. This was about the future. It was about Olivia. I would not let this filth seep into her life. I would not let Mark and Chloe's poison taint her. She deserved a foundation built on truth, not on secrets and lies. The path forward wasn't about choosing between two terrible identities. It was about forging a new one. I wasn't Richard's widow or a forgotten old woman. I was the executioner of a dead man's legacy. And I would not let his evil grant a final victory to a conniving parasite like Chloe. My mind cleared. The fog of horror and indecision burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. They had underestimated me. They saw a relic, a piece of old furniture to be disposed of. They were about to learn that the oldest trees have the deepest roots, and sometimes they can bring the whole forest down with them. The emotional weight was still there, a crushing stone in my soul, but I could bear it. Because I finally knew what I had to do. The first light of dawn was just beginning to streak the sky, painting the edges of the dark clouds in shades of grey and bruised purple. It felt appropriate. Not a bright, cheerful sunrise, but the solemn arrival of a day of reckoning. I picked up my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Mum, what's wrong? Is everything okay?" The feigned concern was almost comical. My voice when I spoke was a stranger's. It was calm, placid, as smooth as undisturbed water. "Everything is fine, Mark. I'm calling to tell you that you've won." There was a silence on the other end. I could hear his mind working, searching for the trap. What? What do you mean?" "I mean the house, the papers, all of it." I said, my tone unchanging. "I'm tired of fighting. I'll sign. You can have it all." I heard a muffled sound in the background, a sharp intake of breath, and then a faint, triumphant squeal that could only have come from Chloe. Mark coughed to cover the sound. "Oh, Mum, I'm so sorry it came to this." We just want what's best. I know, I said the lie, tasting like poison. Let's get it over with. Come to the house, tomorrow, around noon. We can finalize everything. Tomorrow, so soon. He asked, a note of suspicion still in his voice. Why wait? I replied. Let's not drag this out. But Mark, just the three of us. No lawyers. Let's handle this as a family. The word family felt obscene on my tongue. Of course, Mom. Yes, as a family. He sounded relieved, now convinced of his victory. We'll be there? Noon? I hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the silence, listening to the house breathe around me. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a stage, and I was the director, the playwright, and the lead actor. The final act was about to begin. The hours that followed were a study in meticulous preparation. I didn't clean the house. I let the dust motes dance in the sunbeams, a silent testament to the neglect they accused me of. I moved a few things in the living room, placed a heavy crystal vase on a small table, repositioned an armchair. Every object was a piece of the set. The centerpiece, however, had arrived that morning. Olivia had stopped by on her way to a study group, her face a mask of worry. Grandma, are you sure about this? It feels wrong. We should call a lawyer. We can fight this. I had smiled and squeezed her hand. The time for lawyers is past, my love. This is something I have to do myself. I gave her a hug that lingered, breathing in the scent of her youthful optimism. But there is something you can do for me. An hour later, a small bouquet of white lilies sat in the crystal vase on the side table, their funereal scent filling the room. Nestled deep within the waxy petals and green leaves, invisible to a casual glance, was a tiny, high-definition camera. Olivia, my brilliant, tech-savvy girl, had set it up to stream directly to a secure, encrypted server. She had created a digital vault where the truth would be stored safe from deletion or interference. The doorbell rang at precisely 5 minutes past noon. They were fashionably late, a power move. I smoothed the front of my simple black dress and walked to the door. They stood on the porch, radiating a smug, nauseating aura of triumph. Mark wore a suit, looking like a man closing a business deal rather than one evicting his own mother. Chloe was glowing. She wore a bright canary yellow dress, an offensively cheerful color for the occasion. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was on her way to a garden party. As I let them in, she was tapping at her phone, a wide smile on her face. Just posting a little something to my story, she said, her voice breezy. She angled the phone so I could see it. A picture of her and Mark in the car, beaming. The caption read, "New beginnings on the horizon. So blessed to be moving forward. Family. First show blessed." The hashtags were a final, cynical twist of the knife. I led them into the living room, the stage. "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the sofa opposite the armchair where I intended to sit. They settled in Chloe, perching on the edge of the cushion like a bird of prey ready to take flight. Mark sank into the couch, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding my gaze. I let the silence stretch, letting them marinate in their victory. Finally, I folded my hands in my lap. "I have the papers here," I said, patting a manila envelope on the table beside me, "and I will sign them." Chloe's smile widened. Mark visibly relaxed the tension draining from his shoulders. "But," I continued, my voice still perfectly level, "I have one condition." Mark stiffened again. Chloe's eyes narrowed slightly. "A condition? I thought we were past that. It's not about money or possessions," I said, my gaze moving from Mark and locking directly onto her. "It's a simple request. I will sign everything away. My home, my financial security, all of it. In return, I want you to tell me why." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Mum, what's the point of this? Let's just sign and—" "No," I said, my voice cutting through his. I want to hear it. From her. I looked back at Chloe. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Why are you doing this? I feel I've earned that much. Mark looked at Chloe, a silent plea in his eyes. But Chloe's expression had changed. The slight irritation was gone, replaced by a look of sheer predatory indulgence. She saw this as a final, delicious humiliation. The vanquished, begging the victor for an explanation. She leaned back, crossing her legs, and gave a small, condescending smile. It was the smile of a predator playing with its food just before the kill. "All right, Elizabeth," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "If it's the truth you want, it's the truth you'll get." Chloe leaned forward, the canary yellow of her dress, a slash of violent colour in the dim, dusty room. Her smile was gone, replaced by an expression of dismissive pity. It was far more insulting. "Honestly, Liz, you're asking me why?" She let out a small, airy laugh. "Because you're a relic. You, this house, this entire way of life. You're ghosts. You're a monument to a past that is holding my husband, our family, back. This house isn't a home. It's a museum of mediocrity. It smells like mothballs and faded memories." Mark flinched, a flicker of shame crossing his face before it was smoothed away. He stared at a spot on the carpet, refusing to look at me, refusing to look at his wife. "The world is moving forward, Liz." Chloe continued, her voice gaining momentum, warming to her theme. "It's fast, and it's ruthless, and it doesn't have time for sentimentality. It's about ambition. It's about power. It's about taking what you want. Mark has potential, real potential, but it's been suffocated his whole life. First by a father who saw him as nothing more than a pale imitation of himself, and now by a mother who wants to keep him trapped here in this shrine to a man who was, let's be honest, profoundly boring." I remained silent, my hands folded in my lap, my face a calm, unreadable mask. I was a stone wall, letting her words break against me. Inside, every syllable was being recorded not just by the camera, but by me, etched into my memory. Then Richard did the one interesting thing in his entire life. She said, her eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "He died, and he left behind his little secret." She paused, watching me for a reaction. I gave her none. "I found it, you know," she went on, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The red ledger in his desk. I always knew there was something more to him. No one is that bland without a secret." And what a secret it was. A masterpiece of depravity. My God, Liz, did you have any idea the man you shared a bed with for nearly half a century was a pornographer and a blackmailer of the highest order? She laughed again, a short, sharp bark that was utterly devoid of humor. "So I showed it to Mark. I laid it all out for him. Your son, the man who wants to run for city council, the man who wants his name on buildings. His father's legacy wasn't a respectable business. It was a portfolio of filth that could ruin not just him, but half the powerful men in this state." She leaned closer, her voice like silk, wrapping around a razor blade. "I gave him a choice. A simple one, really. We could let this little book destroy everything he's ever worked for. Everything we've worked for. Or we could use it. We could secure our future. But to do that, we needed capital. We needed to be free of all prior obligations. And you, Liz, and this house, you were the primary obligation." I finally met her eyes. "You forced him to choose between his mother and his ambition." "Forced?" Chloe scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, please. I liberated him. Do you know what it's like to be married to a man who lives in such a deep, suffocating shadow? He was pathetic. I didn't blackmail him. I gave him a spine. I showed him that true power isn't inherited, it's taken. Richard's real legacy isn't this dusty house or his boring company." She sneered, gesturing around the room. "It's in the power his secrets give me. He was infinitely more valuable in death than he ever was in life. She sat back, a look of supreme satisfaction on her face. The confession was complete. It was more damning, more arrogant, more sociopathic than I could have ever hoped for. She had not only admitted to the crime, she had proudly outlined her philosophy, her utter contempt for me, for Mark, for morality itself. She looked at Mark, who was still staring at the floor, his face pale and slick, with a fine sheen of sweat. "He knows I'm right. Don't you, darling?" Mark didn't answer. He just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. That small movement, that final betrayal, was the thing that broke the last fragile thread of pity I had for him. He wasn't a victim. He was a willing co-conspirator. Chloe turned her triumphant gaze back to me. "So there you have it, the truth. Are you satisfied? Now can we please get to the signing? I have a celebratory lunch reservation at 1. What she didn't see, what neither of them saw, was the tiny, unblinking eye of the camera nestled in the lilies. She didn't see the crimson light on the secure server icon on Olivia's laptop miles away, confirming the upload. She thought she was delivering a eulogy for my life. In reality, she was signing her own confession, broadcasting her own downfall to a silent digital witness. As Chloe's final damning words hung in the air, thick and poisonous, the doorbell chimed. The sound was sharp electric cutting through the suffocating atmosphere of the room. It was an alien sound, an intrusion from the outside world into our closed, toxic theatre. Mark and Chloe both froze. Mark's head snapped up, his eyes wide with alarm. Chloe's smug expression dissolved, replaced by a sharp, suspicious glare. Her head whipped toward me. "Are you expecting someone?" she demanded, her voice losing its silky condescension and taking on a hard, brittle edge. A small, serene smile touched my lips for the first time. It felt like stretching a muscle I hadn't used in years. I looked directly at her, letting her see the profound, bottomless calm in my eyes. "I believe," I said softly, "that he's here for you." I rose from my armchair, my movements slow and deliberate. I could feel their eyes on me, a mixture of confusion and dawning dread. I walked to the front door, the short distance feeling like a mile. With every step, I felt the power shifting in the room, the immense weight of the last 45 years beginning to lift from my shoulders. I opened the door. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a lawyer. Standing on my porch was Julian Harrison. In person, he was even more imposing than in his photographs. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. He had the kind of handsome, chiseled features that graced the covers of business magazines, but his eyes were flat and cold, the color of a winter sky. They were the eyes of a man who didn't negotiate, a man who solved problems by removing them. Behind him, parked at the curb, was a black sedan with tinted windows, its engine humming quietly. A second man, built like a refrigerator, stood by the driver's side door, his gaze sweeping the street. The day before, after my call with Mark, I had taken a single page from Richard's ledger. The page detailing Julian Harrison's particular depraved appetites, circled multiple times and annotated with dates and locations. I had made one high-quality photocopy. I put it in a plain envelope and mailed it via priority courier to his corporate headquarters, marked for his personal attention. No note, no demands. Just the evidence. A spark thrown into a barrel of gunpowder. Harrison's cold eyes swept past me, dismissing me in an instant, as nothing more than an irrelevant piece of the scenery, a harmless old woman. His gaze penetrated the dim light of the hallway and landed on the figures in the living room. He saw Mark, pale and gaping, and he saw Chloe still frozen in her bright yellow dress, her face a mask of disbelief that was rapidly crumbling into raw terror. He saw a young, beautiful, ambitious woman, the perfect profile for a blackmailer. He took a step inside his expensive leather shoes, making no sound on the hardwood floor. He didn't look at Mark. He didn't look at anything else in the room. His entire focus, his entire predatory intent was fixed on Chloe. He thought she was the one who had the ledger. He thought she was the one threatening to expose him. He wasn't here to pay. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to collect the evidence and permanently, irrevocably silence the source. Chloe's face had gone from pale to chalk white. A small, strangled sound escaped her lips. The smug victor of a moment ago was gone, replaced by a terrified animal that had just realized the hunter it had been tracking was in fact bait for a much larger, more dangerous predator. The real storm had finally arrived, and it was here for her. The silence Julian Harrison left in his wake was a physical thing. It pressed in on the eardrums heavier than the shouting that had preceded it. He hadn't shouted, of course. Men like him never did. His voice had been a low, calm hum of absolute menace, a serpent's whisper promising a world of ruin. He spoke of assets frozen with a single phone call, of reputations dismantled by whispers planted in the right ears. He talked about people who became inconvenient people who simply stopped being a problem. He looked at Chloe when he said it, his eyes flat and dead, like polished river stones. He saw her as the source of his trouble, the amateur who had stumbled into a professional's game. Chloe, for her part, had dissolved. The poised, predatory creature who had sat at my dining table coolly outlining my demise was gone. In her place was a frantic, cornered animal. Her words were a jumble of accusations and denials. "It wasn't me, I swear, it was him," she'd shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Mark. "He made me. He found it. He wanted the money." Then her wild eyes landed on me, standing in the doorway to the hall. No, it was her. She's been planning this all along. She's senile, she's crazy, she doesn't know what she's doing. And Mark, my son. He was a statue carved from fear. His face was the color of ash, his mouth slightly open, as if he'd tried to speak an hour ago and had forgotten to close it. He didn't look at Chloe or Harrison or me. He stared at the intricate pattern on the Persian rug, the one he and Chloe had given me for Christmas 2 years ago, as if it held the answers to the universe. He was seeing the abyss that had opened up at his feet, realizing the game he thought he was playing for control of a house was actually a dance on the edge of a volcano. He was a passenger in his own life, and the driver had just been revealed to be a monster. I had let them spin in their vortex of terror for a full minute, watching the architecture of their deceit collapse in on itself. I saw Harrison take a step toward Chloe, his hand reaching inside his tailored jacket, and that's when I moved. I didn't rush. I walked into the room with the steady, measured steps of a woman who had all the time in the world. In my hands, I held the red leather ledger. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. It felt like the anchor that had held me in place for 45 years. I stopped in the center of the room, a few feet from all of them, a triangle of malice with me at its point. "The evidence you're looking for is here, Mr. Harrison," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was as clear and cool as the evening air outside. All 3 heads snapped toward me. Harrison's eyes narrowed, recognizing the object of his dread. Chloe's face flooded with a new, more profound kind of horror. Mark finally looked up from the floor, and in his eyes I saw the ghost of the little boy I once knew, lost and terrified. Harrison's focus shifted entirely to me. The threat toward Chloe was forgotten, replaced by a cold, reptilian assessment. "Give that to me, old woman!" he hissed. It wasn't a request. I gave a small, sad smile. "That won't be necessary. And you should know threatening me or my family is a remarkably poor strategy at this point." I shifted my gaze to include Chloe and Mark. "My granddaughter, Olivia, is quite the tech wizard. She's part of a generation that understands that information once released can never be put back in the bottle. This afternoon, she finished digitizing every single page of this book. Every name, every date, every disgusting detail Richard so meticulously recorded. I let that sink in. I could see the calculation in Harrison's eyes, the gears turning as he tried to find an angle, a weakness. The complete file, I continued, my voice calm and methodical, is sitting on a dozen encrypted servers scattered from Seattle to Singapore. And it is attached to a very simple, very elegant piece of software. A digital dead man's switch. I looked directly at Harrison. Twice a day, once in the morning, and once at night, I have to log in to a secure portal and enter a code. My granddaughter has a separate secondary code. If either of us misses our scheduled check-in for any reason whatsoever, if we get in a car accident, if we catch a sudden flu, if one of us were to, say, disappear. I paused, letting the word hang in the air. The system will automatically interpret that as a hostile action. The files will be decrypted, and the entire contents of this book, everything Richard recorded, will be sent to a list Olivia curated herself. Every major news outlet on the West Coast, the Justice Department, the FBI, the IRS, several international watchdog agencies, a few particularly tenacious bloggers who specialize in ruining men like you. It's all automated, irreversible. The room was utterly still. The only sound was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had measured out the seconds of my long, quiet servitude. Now it was counting down the end of their world. Harrison's face was a mask of disbelief, slowly crumbling into fury, and then into the cold, hard realization of defeat. He understood. He was a man who dealt in threats and leverage, and I had just taken both away from him. He couldn't touch me. He couldn't touch Olivia. The ledger in my hands was just a symbol now. The real weapon was invisible everywhere and nowhere at once, waiting in the digital ether. I turned my gaze to my son. Mark. His name was a flat, dead thing in my mouth. You stood by. You let her bring this poison into our lives. You were willing to throw your own mother into a home to label me as incompetent, all to get your hands on a house. A house built on filth and pain. He flinched, finally breaking his paralysis, to stammer, "Mum, I didn't know. I didn't know about this." He gestured vaguely at the ledger. "It doesn't matter what you knew," I said, my voice cutting through his excuse. "You knew what you were doing to me. That was enough." Then I looked at Chloe. She was crying now, silent, ugly tears tracking through her expensive makeup. She looked pathetic. "And you," I said softly, "you found this book. You found hell, and you tried to sell tickets to it. You blackmailed your own husband. You saw all this pain, this degradation, and your only thought was to use it for profit. You are more like Richard than I ever knew." The insult hit her harder than any shout could have. Her head bowed in shame. Finally, I looked at all three of them, these architects of my misery. The titan of industry, the grasping heir, the venomous parasite. "Now," I said, my voice regaining its strength, its finality, "you will all leave my house. You will walk out that door, and you will never ever come back. You will not call. You will not write. You will remove every trace of yourselves from my life. As of this moment, you are ghosts to me." For a second, nobody moved. Then Harrison, a man used to giving orders, turned on his heel without a word and walked out. The heavy front door opened and closed with a quiet, definitive click. He was gone. Chloe scrambled to her feet, grabbing her purse, not daring to look at me. She scurried out after him, a rat fleeing a fire. Only Mark remained. He stood there, his shoulders slumped, a man hollowed out. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, there is nothing left to say, Mark." I told him, turning my back on him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. "Go." I heard his footsteps, slow and heavy, on the hardwood floor. I heard the door open and close one last time, and then silence. A real silence. The house was empty. I stood alone in the living room holding the red book. It felt lighter now. I walked over to the fireplace, the one we never used, and placed the ledger on the cold stone of the mantelpiece, a monument to an evil I had lived beside but never seen. I sank into Richard's favourite leather armchair, the one that still held the faint scent of his cigars and his lies. The adrenaline drained away, leaving behind a vast, desolate emptiness. I hadn't won. There were no winners here. I had simply survived. The house felt enormous around me, each room a cavern of memory, each shadow a lurking ghost. I had cast out the demons, but the stains were still on the walls. In the days that followed, the silence in the house changed. It was no longer the oppressive quiet of a life unlived, but the echoing quiet of a tomb. I would walk from room to room, touching the furniture, looking at the photographs on the walls. There was one of Mark as a boy, smiling gap-toothed on a bicycle. There was one of me and Richard on our wedding day, two strangers embarking on a 45-year lie. Every object was a story, and every story was tainted. The air itself felt thick with unshed tears and unspoken screams. I found myself listening for sounds that weren't there. The murmur of men's voices from the study, the clink of glasses from the secret room. I couldn't eat in the dining room. I saw Chloe's smug face, heard her confession playing over and over. I couldn't sleep in my bedroom. The space beside me in the bed felt not empty, but occupied by a monstrous presence. This house wasn't a home. It was a crime scene, and I was its sole remaining occupant, a warden in my own prison. One afternoon, I sat in the living room, staring out the large bay window at the Pacific. The waves crashed on the shore, a constant rhythmic cleansing. They took the sand, churned it, and brought it back over and over. An idea began to form a whisper at first, then a clear, resonant command from a part of myself I was only just getting to know. This place, this beautiful house built on a foundation of horror, could not be my future. But it didn't have to be torn down and forgotten either. Its story didn't have to end with Richard. It could begin again. I spent the next week on the phone. Not with Arthur Vance, the family lawyer who had been so eager to see me put away, but with a woman whose name I found online, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney from a small firm in the city that specialized in trusts and non-profit law. Her name was Sarah Jenkins, and she listened to my story, or the parts of it I could tell without judgment, only a growing look of steely resolve. "So you want to sell the house for a nominal fee to a charitable organization?" she asked, her voice crisp over the phone. "The property is worth, what, 10, maybe 12 million in this market. The money is not the point," I said, looking at the red ledger still sitting on the mantel. "The point is the purpose. Together, we found it. A new, small non-profit that was trying to establish a sanctuary, a safe house for women and their children escaping violent homes. They had the will, the staff, the vision, but they lacked the capital for a physical location. Their dream was a place by the sea, a place where the air was clean and the horizon was wide, a place to heal. My house. The process was complex. We created an anonymous trust to handle the transaction. The bulk of Richard's fortune, the millions he had accumulated through his legitimate businesses, but which were built on the bedrock of his secret evil enterprise, was funneled into it. That money would not only purchase the house for the non-profit for the symbolic price of $1, but it would also fund its operations for the next 50 years. It would pay for counselors, for security, for food and education, and new beginnings. I met the director of the non-profit, once a woman named Maria, whose eyes held a deep, weary kindness. I met her in a coffee shop downtown. I introduced myself as the representative of the anonymous donor. She couldn't stop thanking me, tears welling in her eyes, as she described the lives that would be changed. We never dreamed of a place like this," she stammered, clutching the portfolio of the house I'd given her. "It's a palace, but more than that, it's a fortress. It's safe. It's beautiful. To think that women who have only known fear could wake up to the sound of the ocean. She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. The donor believes in turning bad places into good ones, I said simply. It's a form of reclamation. It was my penance for my own ignorance for the 45 years I had lived in comfort on the proceeds of suffering. And it was my final act of defiance against Richard's memory. He had used this house to break women. I would use it to make them whole. His evil would not be the final chapter written within those walls. It would be the prologue to a story of survival. Packing up a lifetime is a strange and brutal task. 45 years of accumulated things, wedding china we never used, silverware that only came out for holidays steeped in silent tension, boxes and boxes of Richard's books on business and history, all of them a lie. I was ruthless. I hired a company to haul most of it away. I kept only a few photographs of my parents, a handful of my own books, and the clothes on my back. The last thing I packed was the red ledger. I placed it in a small fireproof safe. It was my insurance policy, but it was also a burden I knew I would have to carry for the rest of my days. On the final day, I walked through the empty house one last time. The rooms echoed with my footsteps. The afternoon sun streamed through the clean windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time, I didn't feel the ghosts. The house was just a house now, a beautiful empty shell, waiting for new life, new voices, new laughter. Not the cruel, mocking laughter I had overheard in the restaurant, but the real, joyous laughter of freedom. As I closed the front door behind me, for the last time I heard a sound, and I realized it was my own. It was a quiet laugh of liberation. The air in Oregon smells of salt and pine. It's a clean, sharp scent, free of decay and secrets. My apartment is small, but the windows are large, and they look out over a churning grey-green sea. The walls are white. I have a small kitchen, a comfortable chair for reading, and a spare room for Olivia. There is a peace here that is so profound it feels like a physical presence. It is the silence of contentment, not of oppression. Olivia decided to take a gap year before college. She said she wanted to make sure I was settled, but I know it's more than that. We are partners. We are the survivors. What we went through forged a bond between us that is stronger than blood or time. She is my true legacy, this brilliant, fierce, and compassionate young woman. The only good thing to come out of the wreckage of my past. Most days are quiet. We walk on the beach collecting smooth, sea-worn stones. We read. We talk. We cook simple meals together. We are healing in the way that land heals after a fire slowly, with new green shoots pushing up through the ash. Right now, she is sitting at the small dining table, her laptop open. She's supposed to be researching online courses, but I can see the screen from where I'm standing by the window. It's a major news site. The headline is stark. Harrison Tech CEO resigns amidst personal misconduct allegations. Below it, a cascade of related stories. A prominent judge in San Francisco, a name I recognized from the Ledger, has taken an indefinite leave of absence. A state senator, another name, has abruptly withdrawn his candidacy for re-election, citing family health issues. A massive scandal is unfolding in California, a web of corruption and depravity being unraveled by a series of anonymous targeted leaks. The media is calling the source the janitor, someone who is cleaning house. The leaks are surgical. A single page of the ledger sent to a rival company's board. A specific detail sent to a journalist known for their dogged pursuit of a particular politician. Each leak is designed to cause maximum damage with minimum collateral to isolate and dismantle the powerful men one by one, without ever revealing the whole story. It's a masterpiece of controlled demolition. Olivia feels my gaze on her. She looks up from her screen, and her eyes meet mine. She doesn't say a word. She just gives me a small, knowing smile. It's a smile that holds all the secrets we share, all the justice we have delivered from this quiet little apartment by the sea. I smile back, a true, genuine smile that reaches my eyes. The silence that I lived in for so long was a cage. It was the silence of fear, of loneliness, of being invisible. I thought it was the price of peace, the cost of a comfortable life. I was wrong. This is peace. The sound of the waves crashing on the shore outside my window, a constant, soothing rhythm, washing everything clean. My future is not a grand, sprawling mansion filled with expensive things. It's a small, bright room with a view of the ocean. It's a blank page, an unwritten story. And for the first time in my life, I am the one holding the pen. The world is full of secrets locked away behind walls of wealth, power, and fear. But sometimes a door is left unlocked. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who finds the key. What do you think is the most powerful form of justice, the kind delivered in a courtroom, or the kind that finds its own way out into the light? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have a story about a secret that changed everything, I'd love to hear it.